They didn't just kick me out of the funeral, they erased me from it. Like I was some stain on the family name, not the granddaughter who had held his hand through every hospital visit. My mother didn't look at me. My uncles turned their backs. And my sister, my own flesh and blood, just whispered, "It's not your place anymore." Like my grief had an expiration date. I stood there in heels, sinking into the wet cemetery grass, watching them fold into their black coats like crows over a feast, while I stood in the rain without a chair, without a name, without a family. And just when I turned to leave, heart pounding, eyes burning, I heard a chair scrape. A man in a tailored navy suit stood up from the front row, adjusted his tie, and said with a voice that could cut glass, "Excuse me, but that woman is my client, and she has every right to be here, per the will." The silence that followed was deafening. My uncle's jaw clenched, my sister's smirk dropped, and my mother, she turned pale. They thought they'd buried everything with him, including the truth. But what they didn't know was, the will had one more name they didn't expect. Mine. I'm Julianne Maddox, and if you've ever been pushed aside, cast out, or told your voice didn't matter, this story is for you. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't loud, it's legal, and it's very, very public. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say "listening" in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes, even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel, because I have many more truths to uncover. Thank you. And now, here's my story. I was slicing a frozen bagel in my Vermont kitchen when the text came through. 9 words. That's all it took. Elias Maddox passed away yesterday. Private funeral, Virginia. My hands froze mid-motion, knife pressed against crust. I stared at the message, rereading it as if the words might rearrange themselves into something softer. But they didn't. My grandfather was dead, and I wasn't even supposed to know. The next morning, I was barreling down I-95 in a rust-spotted Subaru, snow swirling like ghosts across the windshield. I hadn't been back to Virginia in years, not since the day I left the Maddox name behind. Or maybe it left me. That line blurred sometime after I got fired for exposing my Uncle Harlan's little accounting magic trick, specifically, embezzling from the family's prized charitable foundation. They buried it fast, and they buried me even faster. Growing up, the only person in that house who ever said my name like it meant something was Elias. He raised me after my parents' implosion, read me law books as bedtime stories, taught me to ask the question no one wanted to answer. But even he couldn't protect me when the Maddox machine decided I was disposable. My Uncle Harlan, the firm's smug puppet master, and his perfect daughter Nicolette made sure of that. To them, I was the stain from a broken marriage. A complication. A name they'd scrubbed out of every family photo. When I arrived at the funeral home, I didn't expect hugs. But I didn't expect a wall of muscle in a rented suit either. He stepped in front of the door before I even reached the steps. "We were instructed not to allow you inside, Miss Maddox." That was it. No sorry, no eye contact, just a protocol. Through the frosted glass, I could see the edge of the flower arrangements, a blur of white roses, a framed photo of Elias in his judge's robe standing proud on an easel. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer. That man taught me to speak truth like it was scripture. And now I wasn't allowed to say goodbye. I stood outside, cold slicing through my coat, heart colder still. No one looked back. Not a single familiar face came out. I wasn't just unwelcome, I'd been erased. I turned to leave, fingers numb and pride bleeding out of me, when I heard the voice. "Miss Maddox." I stopped. An older woman in a gray wool coat stood near the side entrance, her silver hair swept into a twist, her gloved hand holding a sealed envelope pressed with red wax. Gloria Stratton, my grandfather's private counsel. He left instructions, specifically for you, she said. Her voice was sharp, deliberate. He wanted the truth spoken, even if it shatters the room. My throat tightened. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was stare at the envelope in her hand, wondering what kind of truth could still be spoken when every door behind me had already slammed shut. Gloria led me through a side hallway that smelled faintly of lilies and old carpet, into a private waiting room tucked behind the main chapel. A few elderly guests sat scattered across mahogany chairs, murmuring in tones so low they sounded like wind brushing over stone. Gloria shut the door softly behind us and turned to me with the same quiet authority she'd always carried. Your grandfather left very specific instructions, she said. If there was any attempt to exclude you from his funeral, I was to intervene, publicly. I blinked. He planned for this? He expected it. A few moments later, she squared her shoulders and walked through the double doors back into the chapel. I stood behind the threshold, hidden from view, but I could hear everything. The music faded out. A respectful hush fell over the room. Gloria cleared her throat. If I may speak, on behalf of Elias Maddox. I heard the rustling, chairs shifting, whispers rising, then silence again. I stepped forward slightly, just enough to see the back of Nicolette's pristine chignon and the rigid line of Uncle Harlan's jaw. In accordance with the deceased's wishes, Gloria began, I am to read a select excerpt from his will, in the event that his granddaughter, Julianne Maddox, was mistreated or barred from attendance today. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could almost feel Harlan's eyes darting toward the door. Gloria unfolded a cream-colored page with the kind of ceremonial slowness that made every word feel like a gavel strike. Her voice rang clear and deliberate. I, Elias Joseph Maddox, of sound mind and unwavering conviction, hereby bequeath the following. To my granddaughter, Julianne Rose Maddox, my personal library and all annotated manuscripts therein, the honorary shares I hold at Maddox and Associates, and full access to my private journals, archived recordings, and unpublished memoirs. Let no one interfere, redact, or obscure these materials. She alone holds my trust. A stunned silence. Nicolette's hand flew to her chest like she'd been shot. Harlan half rose from his seat, red-faced and ready to speak, but Gloria was already lifting her hand and a small USB drive between her fingers. There's more, she said calmly. A recorded message from Elias, to be played now. She plugged the drive into a small speaker and pressed play. The chapel filled with the familiar gravel of Elias's voice, worn but unmistakably firm. If they've denied you a place at my funeral, then let them hear my voice echoing through the room they tried to keep you from. You are the only one among them who ever dared to tell the truth. That truth nearly broke you, but it saved me. Gasps followed. Murmurs rippled through the rows like rising smoke. Elias continued. To the rest of you, know this. I was aware of the diversion of charitable funds to political fronts, the manipulation of records, and the quiet coercion of silence, and I was ashamed of the family name I once believed in. When the recording ended, the silence was not respectful. It was stunned, ruptured, raw. Gloria turned to me. Her voice was low, just for my ears. He didn't just give you inheritance. He gave you something far more dangerous. His conscience. My heart beat hard against my ribs as I scanned the room. Half the guests were staring at me like I'd walked in carrying a torch and gasoline. The other half avoided my gaze entirely. Then Gloria leaned in, her words like embers pressed into my skin. He chose you to carry the flame, but be careful. In this family, truth is never forgiven. That night, the storm began. An official letter arrived just past midnight, slipped under my apartment door like some poisoned relic. I recognized the family crest before I even unfolded it. Harlan and Nicolette were filing a motion, contesting the will. Their accusations were as brazen as they were cruel. Forged documents, character defamation, exploitation of a grieving legacy. The letter was written in the cold, calculated language of litigation, but between the lines, I could hear Harlan's voice. You don't belong. You never did. By morning, my phone buzzed with news alerts. Headlines danced around the truth, branding me estranged, embattled, the controversial Maddox heir. Commentators speculated that I was seeking fame, that I had manipulated a dying old man. Every angle painted me as something less than human, the same way they always had. Gloria, ever composed, handed me a thick leather folder over lunch at a diner where no one knew our names. He anticipated this, she said, sliding the folder toward me. He prepared for war. Inside were scanned copies of Elias's handwritten journals, his looping script unwavering even as age curled the edges of each page. Alongside them, a flash drive. Gloria's voice lowered. You should watch it alone. Back in my apartment, I sat on the floor with my knees pulled close and played the video. Elias sat in his favorite chair, the same one I used to curl up beside as a child. His voice was slower now but clear, intentional. Julianne, if you're watching this, then the family has chosen pride over truth. Again. But I choose you. Not because you're perfect, but because you don't pretend to be. You're the only one who never asked me to stay quiet for the sake of appearances. I don't remember when I started crying, but I didn't stop until the screen went dark. Later, Gloria sent another email with an attachment and a single line. He believed you could carry this. The attachment? Documents for a foundation, established 3 years ago in my name. Elias had created a community trust, seeded with funds he discreetly pulled from Maddox and Associates. Its mission statement? To rebuild honor, not in the name of legacy, but in the name of conscience. That broke me in a different way. He hadn't just remembered me, he had believed in me, quietly, steadfastly, even when I didn't believe in myself. That night, I opened my old email for the first time in years. Among the digital clutter was an unsent draft from my mother, never completed. It read, "If you've held on to compassion, even after all they've done, then you are already better than them 100 times over." I stared at that line for a long time. In my office the next morning, I wiped down the whiteboard, erased 100 old ideas, and wrote a single phrase at the top. No revenge, only the truth. Then, below it, I circled another line. The story begins in the library. Back in Vermont, the winter hadn't thawed. The wind still scraped at my windows like a warning, but inside the warmth of the library Elias left behind, time moved differently, quieter, older. I spent days sorting through his journals, cataloging manuscripts, scanning old marginalia with a reverence that made me feel both grateful and unworthy. There was so much of him here, pages heavy with ink, ideas scribbled at odd angles, bookmarks that held pieces of his mind. I thought I was prepared for anything. I wasn't. I was cataloging the third row of the west bookshelf when I noticed the anomaly. A small wooden box, no bigger than a shoe, wedged behind a line of law books, its edges just barely peeking out. I pulled it down. It had a brass lock that snapped open with a soft click. Inside, neatly bundled with a silk ribbon now yellowed by time, were 24 letters. Each one addressed in handwriting I hadn't seen since I was 7. My father. The first envelope trembled in my hands as I opened it. The paper smelled faintly of tobacco and old pine. The handwriting was unmistakable, looping and uneven, the way he used to write notes on napkins during our Sunday breakfasts, before everything fell apart. I unfolded the top sheet. It began. Jules, I was at your birthday, the one when you turned 16. I stood in the parking lot for 32 minutes before Harlan came out and told me I wasn't welcome. He said it would confuse you, said you didn't want to see me. Letter after letter told the same story. Attempts to reach me, to send gifts, to arrange visits, legal petitions to gain partial custody. All of them blocked. All of them stopped by Harlan, or worse, by my grandmother. And Elias. Elias had kept them. He had them filed, labeled, preserved, but never delivered. It hit me like a betrayal wrapped in love. I had spent decades believing my father had abandoned me, that he'd vanished, slipped into some selfish life without a backward glance. And yet here was proof, 24 tangible echoes that he had tried and tried again. That I wasn't unwanted. I was just withheld, controlled, curated out of someone else's narrative. I sat on the floor with the box in my lap, letters scattered like autumn leaves around me, and sobbed. Not the clean, cinematic kind of cry. The ugly kind, full of snot and shaking shoulders, and the overwhelming grief of knowing that your entire childhood had been built on a lie. And then came the quieter grief, the one that settled heavier. Elias had known. He'd held these letters for decades. Why hadn't he given them to me? Was he protecting me? Punishing my father? Or just afraid of what it would do to me? To know the truth too early? It didn't matter. It still hurt. I stared at my phone for a long time before I finally called my mother. We hadn't spoken in 6 years. When she answered, her voice cracked with surprise, and I simply said, "I think I understand why you left." There was a pause, then a breath, and then, "Where do you want to meet?" After I hung up, I placed the letters back in the wooden box, wrapped them gently in a new piece of linen, and labeled the lid with a sticky note in red ink. Truth number 2. Not ready for the world yet. The house was quiet when Lena showed up. I'd just finished dusting the poetry section and was mapping out the first public reading series, imagining folding chairs and mugs of cheap coffee in this space Elias once called his thinking room. I had no idea how to host a community event, but that hadn't stopped him either. I had a stack of handwritten flyers on the desk and was cross-checking the guest list with Gloria when the doorbell rang. There she was, Lena Maddox. Younger than me by nearly a decade, daughter of Harlan from his second marriage, and a face I hadn't seen since the last family gathering where I'd been treated like the gum under their Louboutins. She stood at the threshold with a nervous look and a hand resting over her stomach. She was pregnant. I stared for a beat too long before stepping aside. She didn't touch the tea I offered, just looked around the room like it might implode. Then, carefully, she said, "I didn't come to fight. I came because I can't do this alone." I sat down, unsure what this was. "I'm keeping the baby," she whispered. "And I don't want it raised around them. Around that." Her voice cracked. "Harlan wants to name the child. He already picked the school. He said he'd groom it properly, like it's a pet or a product." I stayed silent, letting her talk. That's when she said something I hadn't expected. "I used to think you were the difficult one, the troublemaker. But now I realize you were just the only one who couldn't pretend." I blinked at her, speechless for once. Then she pulled a flash drive from her purse. "I found this hidden in Nicolette's drawer. It's encrypted, but the folder titles are clear enough. One of them says, Pilot Programs, Reallocation Structure. I Googled the terms. It looks like it's how Harlan rerouted the education fund money into campaign donations and shell accounts. I took the drive from her, stunned. Lena leaned in. I want to help, but I can't be named. If they find out I talked to you, I'm out of the will. No roof. No support. Nothing. Her voice trembled. I'm not brave like you, I want to be free. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment, feeling the ache rise up in my ribs. This girl, this polished, proper girl who once looked away when they humiliated me at Thanksgiving, was now here, begging for alliance and protection. And yet, I recognized something in her eyes. That hollow, hunted look. That need to be seen, to be heard, to not be erased. Part of me wanted to reject her, wanted to tell her to fight her own battles. But then I remembered the sting of standing alone in a room full of people who knew better and chose silence. I couldn't be that silence for her. I finally asked, "Why come to me?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I heard them call you the mouth that doesn't know when to shut up." And I thought, that's exactly the kind of person I need right now. I looked down at the flash drive. My hand trembled slightly as I plugged it into Elias's old laptop. The folders began to load, one, then another, and another, each with names, dates, scanned memos. The rot was deeper than I thought. I looked up at the photograph of Elias on the wall. His eyes always seem to see right through you. I smirked. This isn't just about me anymore, is it, old man? The plan was simple. Reckless, maybe, but clean. Lena had learned enough from watching Harlan to mimic the kind of casual deception our family was built on. Smiles masking intent, charm wrapped around daggers. She showed up at Maddox and Associates with a pastel pink bakery box and a helium balloon tied to her wrist, singing "Happy Birthday," just a little too loudly for Nicolette's assistant. The real trick, though, came after. She claimed she forgot her wallet upstairs, promised to be quick, and waited for the building to clear out before calling me in through the back. We didn't have much time. The office smelled like polish and cold ambition. Harlan's name was embossed in gold across every surface that mattered. I hated how familiar it felt. We moved quickly, Lena still in kitten heels, me in sneakers and adrenaline. I knew what I was looking for. Elias once told me, after a second glass of scotch, the things people want hidden, they always keep close enough to feel powerful. So I went for the desk drawer with the fingerprint smudges. The drawer was locked, but beneath it, a false bottom. Lena found it first, her fingers trembling as she lifted the panel to reveal a stack of manila folders, rubber banded together with alarming precision. I pulled one out. It was a contract, then another, and another, each signed with Elias's name. Except they were dated after his cognitive decline had already begun. My throat tightened. These weren't just forged. These were strategically timed. I remembered how frail he looked that last fall, how his sentences frayed at the edges like unraveling thread. And here were full paragraphs bearing his signature, aligning the Maddox Foundation with shell accounts tied to campaign donors and consulting services that led nowhere. They faked his signature, I whispered. Lena nodded, pale. And then I saw the blinking red light. A tiny camera, hidden behind a row of law books. It had been recording us the whole time. Panic surged through Lena's voice. They're gonna press charges. No, I said, straightening my spine. They won't. How can you be sure? Because they'd have to explain why we were in here, and if this goes public, their whole game implodes. They'd have to answer real questions, for once. Still, it wasn't over. We kept going, scanning drawers and hard drives until we hit a file labeled JRM Dead Letters. The name stopped me. My initials. The dead letters part chilled me. Lena plugged in the flash and ran a decryption program Elias had once shown me in a forgotten summer, when he still trusted me enough to share secrets disguised as bedtime stories. The file opened halfway before freezing. What we saw was enough. A list of payments, accounts, wire transfers, all under my name, Julianne Ruth Maddox. Payments I never received, to companies I'd never heard of, with memos like consulting, reputation management, charitable initiatives. They were laundering money. Through me. I leaned back, heart pounding against the walls of my ribs. Oh my God, I breathed. They framed me. They made me the scapegoat, the villain, the distraction. I stared at the screen, bile rising. They didn't just erase me from the family, they built their empire on my name. Gloria showed up that morning with a name like a key she'd been holding in her coat pocket for years, Vivian Caraway. I had never heard it before, but Gloria said it as if it should have been carved into the family crest. She's the only woman Elias ever said he could have married, if it hadn't been for your grandmother. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet urgency. Something had shifted. We drove out to a small town tucked behind farmland and fog. Vivian lived in a narrow Victorian house with peeling blue shutters and a garden that smelled like rosemary and smoke. She answered the door with silver hair in a long braid and eyes so sharp I flinched under them. Lena said nothing. Vivian didn't ask who she was. She led us into a sitting room where everything seemed to wait, books mid-flip on the armrest, tea cooling in the cup. She didn't waste time. Elias sent me something, she said, pressing her palms together like it steadied her. Years ago, after he was diagnosed, he said he might not get the chance to do what was right. She pulled out a key, small and blackened with age. He left a copy of everything Harlan did, everything Nicolette helped cover. I've kept it in my bank vault. My stomach twisted. Vivian paused, her voice softer now. He said if anything happened to him, I should give them to you, because you were the only one who wouldn't bury the truth. Then she added something I wasn't ready for. But that's not the only reason. He believed he ruined your life. That letting you grow up in that house, after sending your mother away, was the choice that broke you. The floor beneath me seemed to pull away. What are you talking about? I asked. Vivian nodded. Your mother wanted to raise you in Maine. Elias intervened, said she was unstable, but mostly he wanted you raised as a Maddox. He thought he was giving you legacy. He didn't see it as taking your freedom. I couldn't breathe. For years I had clung to the idea that Elias was the only one who truly saw me, and now I had to reckon with this. He had been the architect of my imprisonment just as much as my liberator. Later that night, back in my apartment, I stared at the whiteboard. All our evidence, dates, names, and red string metaphors hung there like theater props. I picked up the marker and erased the top line that read, "Justice for Elias." Then I wrote in bold letters, "Not revenge. Tell it all. Even the ugliest parts." Because the truth wasn't just about Harlan or Nicolette, it was about power, legacy, silence, and the people who used them like currency. The ethics complaint had been filed. Gloria submitted it with her usual grace and precision. We included the forged contracts, proof of the money laundering, and references to Elias's mental state during the transactions. I had removed the portions about him manipulating my mother. Not because I was protecting him, but because that part wasn't for public consumption yet. Some truths still needed breathing room. The Maddox family, predictably, announced a grand memorial service to mark 100 days since Elias's passing. It was held at the same hall where he once received a medal from the Supreme Court for lifetime achievement. The room was packed. Reporters lined the back walls. The family wore designer black, standing tall beneath chandeliers and stained glass windows. Nicolette took the stage in pearl earrings and crocodile tears. 3 generations of justice, she said. That's what the Maddox name stands for. I walked in late, deliberately. I wore dark green. The color Elias once told me was the shade of truth people were too afraid to wear. I didn't sit up front with the family. I took the back row, where the overlooked always end up. When the MC invited a representative from the younger Maddox generation to say a few words, no one stood. So I did. I could feel the room stiffen. I walked down the aisle, past whispers and stiff smiles. I reached the microphone and opened my bag. I'm Julianne Maddox, I said, granddaughter of Elias Maddox, the daughter no one claimed, the girl he once left a letter for. In it, he wrote, "Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes." So here I am. I unfolded the documents. These are copies of contracts with Elias's forged signature, created while he was medically incapacitated, used to funnel funds into personal accounts under the guise of charity. Gasps rippled across the crowd. I'm not here to ruin anyone, but I refuse to be quiet anymore. I didn't name Lena, though I hinted at a family member helping me. I didn't show everything, just 2 paragraphs that made the scheme undeniable. I kept it short, precise, brutal. As I turned to leave, one of the Maddox lawyers tried to intervene, calling out, "This is not a courtroom. You can't—" Gloria stood from her seat and raised a folded document. She has every right, and this— She paused, letting it land— is now public record. Silence fell like glass shattering in slow motion. I walked off the stage. No one clapped. No one stopped me either. Lena kept her head down, eyes on the floor. No one reached for me. And yet, I had never stood taller. Outside, the press was waiting. Microphones, flashes, voices barking questions. I gave them nothing but this. I'm not the story. The truth is. Follow that. In the days after my speech at the memorial, the press did what it does best: unearthing, dissecting, spinning. Every headline had the name Maddox in it, some praising, most questioning. Legal teams scrambled to bury what they could, but the Virginia Bar's Ethics Committee announced a formal preliminary investigation. There was no stopping the ripple anymore. Then came a letter, not from a journalist or a critic, but from Elias's longtime estate manager. He asked me to come in person, to retrieve something that had never been filed, never seen a courtroom or lawyer's desk. A personal letter, he said, written by Elias a month before he passed. It's not in the will. He asked me to hold it for you. I sat in the small mahogany-paneled office, the same one where I'd once begged to be taken seriously at age 17. The manager handed me a plain envelope, my name written in Elias's slanted, trembling script. The paper inside was aged, the ink faded, and the words, God. The words were his voice in its most fragile state. He wrote about knowing his time was ending. He confessed to the decision I had always suspected but never had proof of: forcing my mother out, stripping her of custody, so I could be raised as a Maddox under his roof and expectations. I thought I was saving you, he wrote, but I was saving a version of you that would fit, one that could inherit, obey, represent, not live. Then this: you owe me nothing, Jules. But if forgiveness is ever possible, don't offer it to me. Offer it to yourself. My heart broke differently that day, not like the clean, sharp edges of betrayal or abandonment, but in the aching realization that the man I once loved above all had known his failures and still chosen silence over repair. He hadn't asked to be redeemed. He just left behind the pieces for me to decide what to do with them. And so, I made the hardest decision yet. I reached out to the reporter who had first covered my memorial speech. I gave her the rest of it. The evidence that Elias had once weaponized the court to control my upbringing. But I made a single request. Omit his name. Tell the story of a system, of a legacy built not on justice, but curated illusions. We named the article Inheritance of Silence. It ran on the front page. Weeks later, with Gloria's help, I founded a nonprofit called Second Draft. Its mission was simple: help people reclaim their narratives after being erased by the people meant to protect them. Gloria became our legal advisor. Lena joined quietly, advising from behind the scenes, her presence steady even if she never wanted the spotlight. The office was small, but the phone started ringing within days. Nicolette's license was suspended. Harlan stepped down from the honorary bar council. The civil suits began stacking up. Criminal charges hadn't landed. Yet. But for once, consequences had entered their world. One night I stayed late in the office, rereading Elias's letter again. Then I picked up a pen and wrote a letter of my own. To myself at 16. I didn't name anyone. I didn't explain the betrayals or the courtroom drama. I just wrote, "One day you'll stand. Not for them. Not to win. But because the truth will need someone to say it out loud first. You're not the discarded one. You're the one who took a different road. Away from a bloodline built on beautiful lies." A year later, the office of Second Draft sits quietly in Middlebury, Vermont, inside a 2-story wooden house that smells like cedar and old memories. It's the same house I lived in briefly as a child with my grandfather before everything changed. We didn't choose it for symbolism, but it feels right. Roots reclaimed. On my desk sits a photograph. I'm 8 years old in it, cross-legged with a book in my lap, the edges of the page curled under small fingers. Behind me, Elias stands slightly turned, caught mid-motion, not looking at the camera. His face unreadable, but his presence unmistakable. That morning, a new client arrives. Her name is Kayla. Early 20s, hoodie zipped all the way up, hands clenched tightly in her lap. She was kicked out after reporting her brother's abuse. Her father sided with the silence, not the truth. She trembles as she speaks, but one line sticks with me. The people they trust most. They just go quiet. Like it's easier to forget you than believe you. I nod, not interrupting. Then I gesture to the bookshelf beside her. Start with that one, and don't tell me what they said about you. Tell me what they refused to hear. When she leaves, Lena walks in, her baby bump soft and round beneath a cardigan. We don't talk much. We don't need to. Just a quiet exchange of eyes of something unspoken. Peace. The media noise has faded. Some still call me the girl who aired the family's dirty laundry, but I know what I've built, and I know what I stood for. Later that evening, I flip over the old photograph. In faint pencil, Elias had scrawled something I had never noticed before. One day, the truth will need someone to read it out loud. I pin the photo to the wall behind my desk, next to Kayla's intake portrait, Lena's quiet smile, Gloria's firm signature on our founding documents, and a few letters we've received, anonymous, handwritten, from others trying to find their way back to their voice. I turn away from the wall and face the window, where sunlight filters through the maple trees. And in my mind, I hear Elias, not as a judge or architect of legacy, but as a man finally stripped bare. You don't have to inherit anything. You just have to begin. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't the ones we fight in court or at the dinner table, but the quiet ones inside ourselves, when we choose truth over silence, growth over comfort, and dignity over approval. Healing doesn't always look like justice, but it looks like peace. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, subscribe, or just let me know you were here. Your voice matters, and it helps others find theirs too.